Oh, it's an absolute pleasure to be back with you to kick off another week in Sarah's Country, and of course our Newsmaker series where we turn the pages on the Farmers Weekly newspaper that hits your rural mailboxes at the start of the week, and of course all those stories that get loaded up every day on farmersweekly.co.nz and hit your inbox in the My Daily Digest. Can I strongly suggest, if you haven't subscribed to it, you should at farmersweekly.co.nz to keep ahead of the game on the matters that matter most. And one that matters a lot to the Hawke's Bay area is the outbreak of bovine tuberculosis and what has been described by some as the mismanagement of TB by Osprey. We had Hawke's Bay farmer Lloyd Holloway on the show last Monday sharing the financial toll of nearly $500,000 the TB outbreak has had on his business and some of the questions he wants answered from Osprey. Osprey has undergone a lot of management changes in the past couple of years, and at the helm is CEO Steve Stuart, who joins us on the program now. Evening, Steve. Thank you very much for taking the time to front and discuss this issue with us. Can we kick off by you setting the scene about the current operations underway by Osprey in Hawke's Bay?
Certainly, and good evening, and thank you for having me on your program. But firstly, let me say that Osprey is an industry-funded organisation. It's funded by Dairy New Zealand, Beef and Lamb, Deer Industry New Zealand, together with MPI, for the sole purpose of eradicating TB from New Zealand. Now, if we were sitting here 30 years ago, Sarah, there'd be 1,700 farms in New Zealand with TB. All right, we're now down to our final 30, and we're confident that we're on track to be the first country in the world to eradicate TB in farms by 2026. So we have a proud history of managing TB. In the Hawke's Bay at the moment, there are 14 infected farms with TB, all right, and of those 14, 10 are sitting on a clear test. Now, that number's come down from 20 late last year to 14 as herds get their second clear test. And we're confident that that track will continue, and towards the middle of the year, we'll be down to single figures. But we won't give up until we have properly eradicated TB from the Hawke's Bay.
Okay, there's quite a few questions pouring in prior to and, of course, at the moment from our viewers, as you could probably only imagine. And I understand you can't go into too much detail specifically on individual farmers' situations. However, for me, one concern from Lloyd's interview was that the Osprey people that were coming on farm were saying not being specific in the definition of declaring TB, and to them it felt like there was a rush to get clear status, which in turn would help with your glowing numbers of reducing the number of infected properties. Can you give assurance to our audience that no stone is unturned to ensure that the detection of TB is undertaken on farms in New Zealand?
Well, look, there's just no upside in us not being genuine about the number of animals infected with TB or farms infected with TB. We run a massive surveillance program, and anything that we miss one year will be picked up the next year. So to say that we weren't genuine about the way we go about our work and address the farmers with TB is just not correct. We are absolutely determined to have sustainable eradication of TB, and what that means is that it doesn't come back, and we have to work very hard to do that. And all our people in this organisation know the impact that TB has on farmers. We know the impact this has on communities and on their families, on farmers' families, and we're really determined to make sure we have sustainable eradication of TB by 2026, and we do not and will not and will never fudge those numbers, but we are very transparent about it, and people can track that on our online or on our website as we progress towards that goal.
What hasn't been sustainable is the last 11 years at the Tarakina C Block, and there has been an injunction whereby Osprey have achieved what they wanted from the Māori Land Court, which is access onto a property which hasn't had pest management control for a long period of time, over a decade. When will this begin?
The Tartrakina C block, as you know, has been subject to a court case. We weren't involved. We weren't party to those proceedings, although we did give evidence in those proceedings. And that decision has recently been released. There's an appeal period. And what I can tell you, Sarah, is that we have planned for this operation for a long time, and we'll carry out the operation just as soon as we can, and that will be in the very near future.
Are you able to put a time frame around this? A lot of the questions coming into me live are wanting time frames.
Well, you'll appreciate, and I'm sure others, farmers will as well, the sensitivity with which these operations are carried out and the security that's necessary to carry these operations out both successfully and safely. And so I'm not going to go into a specific time date for that very reason.
Okay, the question has been asked on your behalf, so therefore I pass that on to Steve. Another one's coming here from Campbell. What steps have Osprey taken to guarantee another outbreak won't happen over the last 18 months to build back that trust?
Yeah. So Sarah, we're dealing with the biological system, and so there are no guarantees. All right. And so we try and operate at 95% confidence that the work we do will be sustained. In the Hawke's Bay, for example, there's a part of the Hawke's Bay was a vector-free area. We have had 174 areas declared vector-free in New Zealand, and the Hawke's Bay is the first area to break down. All right. So we're dealing with the biological disease, and so these things will happen. We've committed to $20 million worth of work over the next 5 years to eradicate TB from the Hawke's Bay. We are carrying out ground and aerial operations over vast tracts of land, and with those numbers that I talked about earlier, we're confident that we can eradicate TB from the Hawke's Bay. It's just going to take us another couple of years to do that.
What have we learned in the Mycoplasma bovis eradication plan and the use of buffer zones, and how can this be brought in to protect herds from infection?
Well, I'm not so sure there's a connection between buffer zones and bovis and TB, but the view around buffer zones is that we have over 7 million hectares of New Zealand to clear of TB, or potentially possums and TB, and we can't do that all at once. So we protect farms by having buffer zones. The buffer zones prove exactly what they're designed to do, which is they keep the infection away from herds. Now we're down to our last, as I say, 30 herds. But importantly, what the Hawke's Bay taught us is through a risk process, we've actually identified 10 high-risk areas that showed some of the same characteristics as the Hawke's Bay. And so we're working very hard to ensure we protect those herds from any further outbreak.
Do you have concern over the rise of pests in forestry blocks in the North Island as plantation forests blanket more of that country?
I know this is a live debate, and we're aware of it, and we're actually in our Osprey committees inviting and forestry owners into those committees to talk about this. There is a view that they harbour possums, and I think that's true. They don't harbour them the same rate as some of our kind of native forests, but we are working with them to ensure that where they are inside an area which we need to treat for TB purposes, that forestry block is treated as well. So increasingly we're having to engage with forestry owners to make sure we cover that off.
What's your obligation with the Biosecurity New Zealand and to the Biosecurity Act, Steve, when it comes to the connection to compensation to farmers if you fail your duties as an organisation?
So I'm not so sure about failing our duties as an organisation, but the compensation provisions are articulated in the tuberculosis pest management plan. They've been that way for some 20 years. They haven't changed substantially, and they are quite different from the compensation provisions under the Biosecurity Act. And so therefore you get this kind of disparity between the compensations under the Biosecurity Act and under a pest management plan like the TB, which is more restricted. So we pay compensation for reactor animals only, or animals that are sent to the works for animal disease purposes, and that's quite different from some other compensation provisions.
When it comes to NATE, have you seen any decline in the Hawke's Bay area in the use of NATE, or do you believe that this is on the increase and will only help your job?
I think the NATE generally, the levels of compliance with NATE has increased across the whole country. I still don't think it's high enough, and I don't think anybody would agree that it is high enough. So we still have a lot of work to do, but the signs are encouraging that the farmer behaviour towards traceability of animals is important. Things like, TB, M. bovis, and even COVID prove that how important traceability is in managing diseases. And I think that's starting to come through in farmers, and we are seeing compliance levels start to increase, but we've still got a long way to go.
What have you learnt, Steve, in your role around access to land and the different forms of battles that you can have on farm, and particularly from the Tarakina situation, and going forward to give a surety that everybody is equal in pest management?
So I respect, and I think we all respect, that land is important to farmers, to individual landowners, to iwi, and to trust boards. And there wouldn't be a farm that we go on where we don't have to negotiate and talk with the owner around access to their land. It could be because the farming systems they run and it's not suitable for treatment at certain times of the year. And increasingly, in about 99% of the time, we get access to land and are able to do our job. There are occasions when we can't get access to land, and that's the occasions where we have to refer to the courts to give us access to land. Remembering that oftentimes when we have access to land, it's a long-term relationship. We might be around for 5 to 7 to 10 years while we do a number of operations over a period of time. So what we try and do is work with landowners to develop that relationship, to get that ongoing access to land so we can treat it for TB. And as I say, in 99% of the occasions, we actually can do that through mutual agreements.
There's been a lot of debate around the use of gene editing, and in particular the infertility of our pests in this country, and other ways of managing our major pests such as the possum, as opposed to 1080 drops. How far are we in that research and development?
Look, we haven't ventured into that area too far. What we are doing with our research and development program, though, is looking at vastly improved ways and more efficient ways to manage TB, with the likes of drone technology, with thermal imaging cameras, and Internet of Things, and looking at much more cost-effective ways to monitor and surveil large areas of land that takes away some of the manual work that we currently do. Therefore, we can apply the savings we might get through more efficiencies into other pest management operations.
There is a comment that has come in here that was of grave concern to not only me but our wider farming communities, that witness Hawke's Bay not only under a movement control because of TB, but it was M. bovis, it was drought, it was a backup of processing at the time because of COVID. It was literally the perfect storm. What work can you do to collaborate around the movement and the cattle restrictions when there is so much else at play?
Oh, look, that period of time, as you say, Sarah, that was a perfect storm. I wouldn't want to be in any farmer's shoes and during that period of time, and I felt it a great deal, for the farmers. There was TB, as you said, there was the drought. There was no feed in the vast majority of the country, and it was a tough farming period for everyone. We invested in rural support and a wee bit of feed where we could, but the reality is our hands were tied in terms of trying to move animals to other areas because everyone was in the same boat. So it was a really, really difficult time. I acknowledge that, and I appreciate the tensions and frustrations farmers must have had over that period of time, because it was really tough. And I visited some farms and I saw firsthand for myself just how tough that was for farmers, for families, and whole communities, in fact.
In terms of modelling out disease, we're very familiar with that with M. bovis, and of course the work that was done in the communication of that led to the way that New Zealand successfully has handled our COVID response. Steve, what have you taken from the learnings in being able to communicate outbreaks, and when there is a lot of hearsay and word of mouth on where it is and how far it has spread?
Yeah, look, I think we do, and I think Osprey do a pretty good job at managing disease, as I've talked about. But the essence of disease management is also around engagement and communication with farmers and their families and communities. And I think that's an area that we have to improve on. There was, I think that we have to act smarter and have to act faster when these things happen. And just recently, in fact, many of the people in the organisation have undergone what we call response training. So we can, in the future, step up a response with communication and with engagement much faster than we did in the Hawke's Bay. So we have learned a lot of lessons out of what came out of the Hawke's Bay, and are much better positioned should this happen again.
There's been a lot of complimentary comments coming through just as much, Steve, and thank you so much for taking the time to front. It's much appreciated that, of course, the pressure is on our organisations to ask the hard questions, but at the same time, we do take into account the work that is going on to change for the betterment of our future. So thank you so much. I really appreciate your time, CEO for Osprey, Steve Stuart.